Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nidus Anarchy series. I'm your host Adam, CIO and co-founder of Nidus, and today we're going to talk about how SaaS may be getting killed by AI. So there's been a lot of hubbub going around from Microsoft CEO talking about how SaaS applications, the people are saying they're dead, they're going to kill them and all this kind of stuff. I think it's going to be a change in landscape. But he has a 3-minute video here about talking about more about the evolution of SaaS apps and where we're going to go with the advent of AI, and more specifically with agentic AI, using agents to perform tasks. So what we're going to do is we're going to play the video by him talking about this, and I'm just going to kind of interrupt, kind of give my 2 cents and explain kind of what he's talking about.
SaaS applications or biz apps. So let me just speak of our own dynamics thing.
Right.
The approach at least we're taking is, I think the notion that business applications exist, that's probably where they'll all collapse, right, in the agent era. Because if you think about it, right, they are essentially CRUD databases with a bunch of business logic.
Okay, so if you're in the IAM space, you know CRUD, we work with this every day, right? From a provisioning standpoint, from an identity management standpoint. So CRUD, C-R-U-D, is create, read, update, delete, destroy, disable, depending on how you look at it, but basically, terminate access. So it's all about user access. So we can create an account, we can read the account, we can make updates to the account, and then we can disable the account or delete it. So that's what the CRUD model is that he's talking about.
The business logic is all going to these agents. And these agents are going to be multi-repo CRUD, right? So they're not going to discriminate between what the backend is. They're going to update multiple databases, and all the logic will be in the AI tier, so to speak.
So what's interesting that he's talking about here, which I really like, is he's talking about the AI tier. This is going to be a whole new tier in infrastructure that we build out, right? So normally we have the data layer, we have an application tier, we have a web tier. So now he's talking about an AI tier. Sometimes we have a middleware tier. This AI tier that he's talking about really is going to take over all these other tiers from a business logic perspective, like he's saying. So what he's imagining is, instead of there being all these different SaaS providers, what we're going to have is different data providers, more like data sources that we're reading into, and that the AI, like the LLMs with these agentic behaviors, all these different agents, will then just be able to read from the data and then be able to act on it based on whatever's there. So what's interesting is he's talking, basically the SaaS model that he's talking about, like the business development side, is going to be ripped apart and turned into agents. So if you're saying like, hey, instead of using Salesforce and you're like, hey, I need to find out who are my top sellers and I need to, run a report on it, you could just talk to your LLM because it has access to all the raw data, and you could just generate the report that you want. You could dump out the list of your top salespeople. You could, send an email because it'll be able to say, hey, you could even be able to write commands that just say, find out whoever my top salespeople are, go through each one of them, find the top 5 clients for each one of them, shoot them out an email that's generated specifically to that client that will give them some type of an incentive for this new product offering that we're doing, and build it up and let me see the email as a template before you mail it out. And it will be able then to do all that work. It'll go through the databases to find all the information, correlate all the information, create the email templates. And then let's say you don't, I don't know how to write an email. It doesn't know how to actually send the email, like connect to an SMTP server or whatever. Well, in that case, the agent could even write its own tools, essentially write its own agents, that then it can then go ahead and send the email. So if it doesn't know how to do something, the agents will be able to create the tools that are needed to then go and do whatever it has to do. This is not something in the future. This is not some crazy, is it going to happen? This is happening. Agents being able to create tools to use them to make themselves smarter and more powerful has been going on for months now. It's just not kind of mainstream, but it's definitely in the back end. So when you're seeing things like Cursor or Windsurf, a lot of these tools, even like the chat LLMs that you're using, when you're using like ChatGPT and Claude, all of these are using agents behind the scenes. You're just not really realizing it. You think you're just talking just to an LLM, but there's a lot more going on. So a perfect example would be, let's say you're talking with ChatGPT and you ask it a question about something more recent that's happening today, last week, whatever. You're like, hey, what's going on with all these UFOs? Well, all these LLMs are only trained up to a certain amount of data. So if it wants to get more information, it needs to go out to the internet, aka a data store, which really is all the internet is to these LLMs, and then retrieve all the information and bring it back. So it's using an agent to then crawl the web to find the information, bring it back, and then repurpose it to dump it to the screen. So you've already been using agents. You probably just don't even know that it's happening.
And once the AI tier becomes the place where all the logic is, then people will start replacing the backends, right? We have people, that's what, in fact, it's interesting. As we speak, I think we are seeing pretty high rates of wins on Dynamics backends and the agent use. And we are going to go pretty aggressively and try and collapse it all, right? Whether it's in customer service, whether it is in, by the way, the other.
So one of the things he's talking about is about how we're going to collapse all these databases on the back end and make all the data a lot more uniform. And this makes sense because if we wind up removing all these SaaS services, if you don't need Salesforce anymore, and if you don't need MailChimp anymore, and if you don't need whatever anymore, you have all this data in disparate systems. Well, now if you have a singular AI tier that has all the model that's doing all the logic, and that's what's handling everything, it's better to have all that data in a single source or as few sources as possible. So therefore it just has all the information readily available and doesn't have to reach out to multiple systems. And then that reduces data duplication. So instead of having all your client lists across 5 different systems, you now have it in one. So I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more federated data system models, right? So I think that's going to be more of where we're going to go from a data backend, is not necessarily the web front end, but more from a data backend. And the way that I view this, for me, is kind of like how developers view SaaS apps, I think. Is when I look at an app, I'm not thinking, oh, look at this cool front end of what I can do. For me, it's more, okay, what are your API endpoints that you have so that I can just make calls to you, and then you can interface with the data backend that you have, and then give me the results I need based on whatever magic that you have in your SaaS app. So I think that's going to be kind of the first step, is you're going to see a lot more API SaaS products out there meant for LLMs to interact with. And that's when you're going to start seeing that shift happen. And I think the way that they're going to do that is just by promoting almost like an LLM REST endpoint. Like you've already seen with Claude MCP, the Model Context Protocol, which is they're building protocols for LLMs to interact with all these other services. So what we're going to see now is, right now we have like SaaS apps like, oh, come to my cool website where you can come in and log in and you can do whatever. Then from them, we added federation. Now you can federate with your own user store and log in and then access our system and do all the fun things. Then it was, hey, look, we also have an API. So now your systems can talk to our systems and they can interact and do all kinds of stuff with API keys and secrets or OAuth or whatever. From there, we're now going to, with like the advent of like MCP and what we're going to see with all these other LLMs, we're probably going to see more LLM API specific whole new route of data access, where it's not really, I mean, I guess it really just would be an API. I think right now it's nice because you just like, hey, look, here's the API spec, and it just knows how to read and write the API. I think it'll be interesting when we start having the APIs a little bit more built specifically for agents in LLMs. And I think we're going to see more of that as being promoted. So instead of saying, hey, look, check out our cool SaaS app, they're going to say, hey, look, this is this cool functionality that we were able to do. Here's the API endpoint for your LLM to talk to. That's when things are going to start getting a little bit more crazy. And then we're going to have that consolidation, which is what Satya is talking about, is the data consolidation, right? So instead of having hundreds of SaaS apps with all this data duplicated everywhere, we're just going to be able to consolidate to one thing, because the LLM will have all that logic for all the stuff that we don't need to pay for SaaS apps anymore. Like let's say Salesforce or HubSpot and all these ones that are doing CRM and things, we can consolidate all that. We can do that all locally with custom apps. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens later.
Fascinating thing that's increasing is just not CRM, but even our what we call finance and operations, because people want more AI native biz apps, right? That means the biz app, the logic tier can be orchestrated by AI and AI agents. So in other words, Copilot to agent to my business application should be very seamless.
That's exactly what I was just talking about, right? So good. So I'm glad we're on the same page. So yeah, so what he's saying is just that applications are going to be built out more for AIs and their agentic behavior to interact with. So therefore we can have this seamless interaction with our local AIs and these off-prem data sets to do whatever we want to do with the data.
Now, in the same vein, you could even say, hey, why do I need Excel? Like, interestingly enough, one of the most exciting things for me is Excel with Python is like GitHub with Copilot, right?
So you're going to hear him talk a lot about Copilot, as we've heard, and Copilot's really not that great right now. But obviously it's Microsoft. They're only going to tout their own LLM for everything. But don't think that this is just Microsoft specific. Don't think that only Microsoft is capable of doing this and that only their Copilot LLM is going to be doing all this stuff. It's not. They all work pretty much the exact same way. There's actually the OpenAI spec of how they interact with each other and stuff. So all LLMs will behave the way he's talking about, even though he keep referencing Copilot throughout this whole thing.
So what we have done is when you have Excel, like this, by the way, it would be fun for you guys, right? Which is you should just bring up Excel, bring up Copilot and start playing with it, because it's no longer like, oh, it is like having a data analyst. And so it's no longer just making sense of the numbers that you have. It will do the plan for you, right? It will literally, like how GitHub Copilot Workspace creates the plan and then it executes the plan. This is like a data analyst who is using Excel as a sort of row column visualization to do analysis scratchpad.
So I think it's interesting that he's talking about Excel with this data Copilot on the side. It's really just like any other LLM that just has access to the data as you're typing. So instead of it, I think when this happens, whenever Microsoft pushes out Copilot tied into Excel and Word and the whole Office suite, which is what's on every computer that everyone uses on a day-to-day basis in the corporate world, that's when I think we're going to reach that. We're going to start getting to that mass adoption rate, because then you have normal people that don't understand anything about AI, have never really used LLMs or are afraid of it and whatever. They're going to have it in there by default. It's basically going to be the next Clippy. This thing's going to pop out and be like, hey, I can help with this, whatever. And then people are like, this is magic. Like I've already seen it like in Teams meetings and stuff when people are like, this Copilot stuff is amazing. It's like, okay, this has been going on for a year and you're just figuring this out. Yeah, so this is going to be the same thing. So this is really going to help with that adoption curve. Now, every LLM out there has lots of access to things like this right now. You could set up an LLM to interact with your Excel right now if you really wanted to. And what's going to happen is the way that we're getting the benefit of using LLMs within our IDEs, using Cursor or Windsurf, like how I like to use, personally, I'm a Windsurf fan, the monumental change and shift in how you do your work, that's going to happen on the Office suite side. So once that integration happens and people really start playing with Excel with an LLM attached to it, and they find out what kind of mass amounts of work they can get done way faster, they can get a lot more technical analysis done. They can get way more complicated work done and get a lot better work done quicker. That's when people are like, man, this AI stuff is awesome. It's because it's really going to be their first time really playing with it. So when Microsoft ties this thing to Copilot and that just is Excel and that is how this whole thing works, that's when we're going to see just massive agentic AI adoption.
So it's kind of tools you. So the Copilot is using Excel as a tool with all of its action space because it can generate, and it has Python interpreter. That is, in fact, a great way to reconceptualize.
So we kind of glossed over that real quick. So he mentioned that how Copilot has a Python interpreter. So at first he said Excel with Python, and now Excel with this GitHub Copilot with a Python interpreter and blah, 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 blah. What that means is, which is the really important part, is because Copilot has a Python interpreter, it can write code and then execute that code to solve problems and do things with the data that's in Excel. So if you had an Excel spreadsheet about, hey, look, here's all of our sales history and the people and whatever, and you say, you give it whatever requests you want, if it's not able to figure it out right there just from reading the data, and it needs to actually run calculations or make REST calls to other services or call other agents to do other things, this Python interpreter will be able to do all of that. It'll be able to write the code, execute the code, and deliver the results and dump them back into the Excel sheet for you, all by just giving it natural language processing, just saying, typing to it, saying, hey, this is what I want. This is the end result I want. Make it happen. I don't care how you do it. It can go forth and do that. So because it has that Python interpreter, that gives it a lot more flexibility. That's one of the downsides of Claude. Like I love Claude, but it doesn't have the interpreter. It will not run the code that it generates where ChatGPT will. So that's one of the benefits as well.
Excel. And at some point you could say, hey, I'll generate all of Excel. And that is also true. After all, there's a code interpreter, right? So therefore you can generate anything.
What he's talking about, generate Excel, is he's saying you could just make your own Excel. So I don't know if he realizes this, but that one statement, he just said, our Office suite is obsolete because you can just make your own. You don't need to buy Excel anymore. And that's where we're going. And I'll get to that in that whole thought where I think software and SaaS and all that stuff is going later. But he's true. It's You're not going to need Excel. You could just say, hey, make me a clone of Excel, and then you don't have to pay anyone, and you have your own local Excel running.
And so, yes, I think there will be disruption. But so the way we are approaching at least our M365 stuff is, one is build Copilot as that organizing layer, UI for AI, get all agents, including our own agents. You can say the Excel is an agent to my Copilot. Word is an agent. It's kind of specialized canvases, which is I'm doing a legal document. Let me take it into Pages and then to Word, and then have the Copilot go with it. Go into Excel and have the Copilot go with it. And so that's sort of a new way to think about the work.
So when he's talking about agents, if you're unfamiliar with this, or this sounds a little confusing, just think of it this way. When he's saying there's an Excel agent or a Word agent, you really could kind of, if you're familiar with the identity space, you could think of that as like a connector. So the agents are connectors for the LLMs to talk to a system. So with an Excel agent, the Copilot will then be able to interact with Excel and make Excel spreadsheets and modify them, and then go into Word and write the documentation with the Word agent. So that's really what he's saying, is more that instead of you doing all your work in Excel and writing all this stuff in a Word doc, instead you're going to be using their AI UI that he just mentioned, where you're going to type everything out and just say, this is what I want. And then it's going to go with its agents and connect to Excel to make the spreadsheet and connect to Word to make the documentation. So that's why, like, if you look on the previous one where I was talking about how do I use Windsurf for my development, I've put the LLM chatbot part on the left side, the code in the middle, and then the all the file listings and stuff on the right, where normally it would be all swapped all around, because the IDE where you do all the code is the most main important part. It's not anymore. Now that main important part is really small for me. It's in like the top middle of the window, just so I can see it for reference. The terminal on the bottom, so I can actually run stuff and watch the logs as it's happening. The files are on the right, just so I can click around as a navigation system. But the chat part on the left, that is the main interface. That is what I work in 95% of the time when I'm doing development. And that's just going to carry over when we get to these types of apps with the GitHub Copilot, what he's talking about. You're going to have the AI UI, which is just you talking with the AI. The agents will then interact with all the software. You're not going to go into Excel. You're not going to have to go into Excel, because it will just do it for you.
I was going to ask you something really quick as like a layman on this as you're discussing it. So I was thinking Microsoft Excel, that's like one very small part of what Microsoft does. If it becomes obsolete, it's not the end of the world. What about a company like DocuSign, where that's like their entire business and they're a publicly traded company?
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about that. So that is where I kind of got hooked up with. Okay, so there's the clickbait article saying SaaS is dead. AI is going to kill SaaS. SaaS is over. And then they're talking from this interview, because he's saying, oh, we're not going to use SaaS anymore because there's going to be data backends and we're going to have AI LLMs. So apps like DocuSign, or apps that are purely SaaS-based, where they offer something like HubSpot or Salesforce, those big apps, how do I say this? They will die, or they're gonna not really die, but they're gonna have to adopt and just reinvent themselves. The SaaS world that we know, that we've built up to this point, the whole Web 2.0 thing, that is now over. Web 3 is considered blockchain, so I guess we're moving on to Web 4, or I don't know. We're in AI naming, so I guess we'll just call this Web 07. It's like we'll just come up with some random name because that doesn't go in order, right? So we're onto a whole new thing now. So these big apps are definitely going to change. Something like DocuSign, it's really not that hard. The only reason DocuSign is going to exist is because people trust it. So it's a place where people trust a signature to be taken and then served. So if someone says, hey, look, I signed this on DocuSign and here's the raw output, companies have already said, we trust DocuSign. So that one will still be around for a while. But I could easily write a DocuSign SaaS app for myself. Easily. Very easily.
The only thing DocuSign does that I think is kind of interesting, and I don't know if you could replicate this with AI, you'd have a better idea, is so I've used PDF filler, which is pretty much the exact same thing. And I remember last year I had to electronically send tax documents. Mm-hmm. Can you do that through an AI generated app pretty easily? Okay.
Very easily. So I could just say, hey, look, here's the PDF of whatever contract, tax documents, whatever it is that you want signed or done something with or filled out. And you could just say, hey, look, make me a UI that will read in a PDF file, let me highlight certain areas where I want to add text from a third party, drop in a signature, give me a signature form fill box, and then once it's all done and once all the fields have been signed by all the parties, then email everybody copies. You could absolutely do that. I mean, if I wanted to, I could probably make a very rough draft of that app in a day that works. And that's where this whole shift is going to happen, is all these people that are making and charging tons of money for SaaS apps, a lot of that's going to go away because people can just make their own versions or make a much cheaper version because there isn't nearly as much development or support behind it that's needed. So I think that's going to be the biggest transition, is we're going to see all these huge SaaS-based applications just start and get wiped out by smaller ones that are AI integrated, that are very AI first, that are built for agentic tie-ins to LLMs externally. So therefore, if you have your own local LLM, you can just call in and get the information, and then you just really become a data store, which is kind of what he was talking about. I was actually doing a little bit of question. I was actually asking some questions on here. Let's see here. So what are the top SaaS apps around now? Let's just see what we got going on. So I'm using Perplexity because I want real-time information, and it's really good at research. So I'm asking it, what are the top SaaS apps? So let's see what we can do from a replacement standpoint. So, okay, project management, collaboration, Asana. Project management. Okay, Asana is great. Yeah, you could definitely make something that you could do internally. Jira, that's another one. You could definitely replicate that. Now, are they going to, and are people going to want to do that? Yes and no. If you're a smaller company and you don't want to pay all the money for all these things, you could easily just say, hey, look, I could just write something for what we need that's highly customized for how our business works. This is a perfect case point for this would be my tattoo shop. And this is a very weird segue, so just kind of stay with me on this. I opened a tattoo shop 13 years ago down in Puerto Rico. It's called Live Once Inc. It's the best shop in the world. And one of the big frustrations I had back then was that there was no appointment booking software, well, one really at all, but specifically for tattoo shops. They're just nothings. Everyone did the same thing. They had an Excel sheet, or they would just use emails and set a calendar and just book a ton of appointments on the calendar. Very manual, very tedious, no follow-up, lost stuff all the time. You couldn't keep track of history, no client information. And tattoo shops are not tech shops, right? They're absolutely lowest rung from a tech perspective, the farthest removed from technology. So I made a software platform that does all the appointments and bookings and client management for my shop. And then when I opened up my second shop out in California, we ran it on there. And it still runs to this day, actually. It's crazy. It's been running for 13 years and it's still doing all the appointments. Nowadays, there's definitely software out there that's better, that can do a lot more, and it's way more integrated with things than the stuff that I wrote, for sure. I haven't even touched it in probably 10 years, honestly. But this is where I think the dilemma is going to happen. So there are things like booking.com. I think there's one for like salons and stuff. You could repurpose it for a tattoo shop because they work pretty much the same way. So that you could be paying, $50, $100 a month or per person or whatever their fees are. But now, if you have even someone, just a tattoo shop owner that doesn't even know anything about tech, realistically, they could make an app for themselves. It's like, hey, look, I need custom booking appointment software, but here's how I want to do it. And then they could just type it all in their free time. In a couple of weeks, they'll have software that works, is deployed, and manages their shop. And now they don't have to pay anybody. They're just paying hosting fees, which is a couple dollars a month, right? So this is where I think we're going to see a lot of stuff. Is a lot of these big apps are charging lots of money and they don't really do a lot, or it's something that's easily replicatable from AI. It's all going to get wiped out with custom software. So I think we're going to see a big loop back to where we were like in the early 2000s, where before there was SaaS, everyone was writing homegrown apps, right? So when you go into a client and you're like, okay, what is this app we need to connect to? And like, oh, this is this homegrown thing. It's been around for 20 years. The guy's dead that wrote it, and we have no documentation. It works, and we don't touch it. We're going to have a lot of that stuff happening, because what we're going to see is people saying, hey, I have a problem. And instead of doing an RFP and going out through all these different, AOA analysis of alternatives or all the different products that could possibly solve the problem, and dealing with all these salespeople and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in licensing or millions of dollars in installation fees and licensing and multi-year terms and all this kind of stuff and contracts and all the headache of dealing with software companies, you're going to get one guy be like, hey, I could just make this, and I could probably get something exactly how we want it. It'll have all the bells and whistles that we need. And I could probably do this thing in a couple months with a team of like 2 people. and it will be better and more custom tailored to this thing that you want to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for. And that's going to get the attention of the CIO or CISO or whoever's in charge and be like, you know what? Let's let you run with this and just see what you can come up with. It's worth it. Like for a couple, maybe like 10, 20 grand worth of development time, they can actually get an MVP product worked out. And at that point, like, oh, wow. And then they can develop it on themselves. So I think we're going to see a lot of in-house custom development apps through AI, integrated with AI, coming up soon. And then we're going to go right after that. It's going to come full backboard to the other thing, which is, oh man, look at all these custom apps. Now we have to manage all this stuff. We have to maintain it all. The guy left. There's no documentation. It's going to be all that all over again. So then we're going to have one of two things. There's going to be a fork in the road at that point. And I have an idea which way we're going to go. But one way is we're going to go, oh, well, I don't want to manage custom apps anymore. I don't want to handle this stuff internally. I don't want to be responsible for it. This is crazy. Let's consolidate it all. And then what we're going to have is a new SaaS model, but it's more like, hey, look, it's agents as a service or something where, hey, instead of you managing all this stuff, we'll come in and manage it all for you. We'll create all these custom agents for you, and you can just use those. All your people can type and do all that kind of stuff, but we'll take it all over for you. And people are like, oh, this is great. Consolidate. And then they're back to paying one person a licensing fee and whatever. So I see there's that route. The other route, which I think is probably more likely, is a route that we haven't been down. So when we have these companies that start building out all these custom applications and we just don't know how they work and they don't know what they're doing anymore, we're just going to build an AI agent that sits on top of all of them to manage them. So when we build all these custom apps internally that are all AI modded, there'll be an agent, almost like an AI project manager that keeps track of them all. So when we say like, hey, look, what are all the custom apps we have? It knows about all of them. How does this one work? It'll just generate documentation on the fly. And then it'll be to the point where you don't even really need the documentation. It'll just know of all the apps that you have. It has access to all the repos for all the code that's made. And you can say, hey, I need to do X, Y, and Z. It will be able to make the changes on the fly to do whatever it needs to do. So the benefit of that is we don't have to worry about maintaining and documenting all this crazy code that we make, because in the end, the AI systems will be smart enough just to do it for us on demand, on the fly. So I think what's going to happen is this. I think we're going to see a mass consolidation of SaaS platforms. I think a lot of these big ones that are just charging buttloads of money out there are all going to be under a world of hurt in the next couple of years. Enterprise, thankfully for them, is the slowest thing to move. So it's going to be the slowest adoption rate for sure. But when it comes to financial crunches and budget reductions and layoffs and all this other stuff, that's going to be on the table is, hey, look, we're paying $300 grand a year for this thing. Bob says that he can make what this thing does in about 3 months. We want to maintain it, sure, but it'll be more resilient, more robust, and it's actually pretty easy. We don't have to worry about documentation. He's shown the demo. The thing works. It's pretty awesome. Screw it. Let's just use Bob's app. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Now, what we're also going to see, though, is I think we're going to see us first before the huge SaaS consolidation. I think we're going to see a micro SaaS explosion. So kind of like back when, like around the MySpace days, I would say, that's how I'm referring to time. So around the MySpace time, there are all kinds of spam websites. Remember that? Remember when, like, every time you go somewhere, it's like a spam site with just full of ads and garbage context, and it was just using Google's filters just to get searched to generate money or whatever. But the internet was just so full of spam. That's why Google took off and became so successful, because it was really good at filtering out just the real results. So therefore, you didn't have to worry about seeing all these dumb spam sites. We're going to have something like that. Hopefully not as bad. Well, we're definitely going to get spam sites, but is it going to get around the search filter and stuff? I don't know. People aren't really searching for stuff anymore either, right? Because you're using LLMs to look for information. So as long as they're good at filtering it, I guess we're good. But we're going to see a explosion of micro SaaS apps where someone says, hey, you know what? I wish I had an app that would do something super, very specific. Like, I don't know if you guys know this. I'm a big fan of Monster Rehab. Not sponsored in any way, shape, or form, but the stuff's amazing. Now, let's say, you know what? I want to know every time my local 7-Eleven gets stocked up with Monster Rehab. I'm going back to an old college hack that I did. I'll explain that in the end. But so I'm going to write an app that basically just says, hey, look, I've found an API with 7-Eleven that lets me view all what they have in stock real time. That would actually be really smart if 7-Eleven did that. If I could just see what they have in stock real time, then okay, now I'm going to make a little app that's just called, Monster in Stock or something.com. So you go there and you can type in your zip code and it will just show me, hey, look, here's where all the products are that I can go get it wherever I want. Because one of the problems in Manhattan whenever I want to buy Monster Rehab, I can't find it, and it drives me utter insane. So I keep going bodega to bodega to bodega. They don't have it. Like, no, we got the green one. That's gross. I want the yellow one. Anyway, so if I can make a quick little app that just lets me see that product and where it is real fast, that's awesome. I could make that in about an hour, spin it up on Amplify, and have that thing running. I've been spinning up so many of these little ideas like this that are just beneficial for me. Well, now all you got to do is just change the product from Monster Rehab to product X. Well, now I can say, hey, look, this is now a SaaS product. So you can keep track of your favorite product or your business, and you can let everyone know where it is by just linking to it. And it's $1 a month. Cool. I don't have to write the app. It's better than spending hours in maintaining it and all this stuff, because for $1 a month, hey, that's awesome. So now for $1 a month, I can now keep track of where all of my favorite things are in stock all the time. That's the kind of stuff that we're going to see. Very hyper specific things for very specific demographics that solve one problem, but they do it really easy in a really cool way. And we're just going to see that kind of stuff going everywhere. And then if they're smart, now they should be building that agent layer, because all these little mini microservices that are going to start spinning up, they're micro SaaS apps. If they have that agentic tie-in, then you could just put yourself into almost like a repo of microservices that say, hey, look, you can now call this for that, and just have this library. So when then you have this massive agentic library that you can tap into, and your LLM says, hey, look, I need to know when a product is in stock, and I want to know real time, and I want a text message every time it's updated. It can then go search this agent library and then find, oh, hey, look, here's this productinstock.com agent API. It's $1 a month to join to it. I can buy it on the agent app store, tie it into my LLM. So now it just makes one app. So now I can, on my computer, I can do all the things I want to do. I'm going to get a text message every time Monster Rehab's in place, and it costs me $0.25 a month or something, even smaller. I think micro payments tied to micro SaaS services is going to be the next big thing. Then from there, that's when you're going to start seeing. So when these micro like SaaSes start building up, that's when you're going to start seeing kind of the fall of the demand of the larger SaaS apps, because a lot of that's going to be replicated real fast. And once it's replicated, especially these apps where they only do one thing, kind of like DocuSign that you're saying. So DocuSign is different because there's that trust factor. But if we were taking some other like SaaS app here, let's see what else do we have on here. So FreshBooks, HubSpot, Canva, Dropbox, Zoom. Yeah, like all these things, like Jira, right? Jira is one where Jira has a ton of features in it and no one uses them all. Only people that want to pat themselves on the back about how they're a Scrum Master or something. But no one uses that. What they use it for is very simple. Who has to do what? How long is it going to take? Are there any dependencies? And what is this a part of a hierarchy? That's really it. It's just a project. It's just status requirements. Like, hey, where is this? What are we doing? What's going on? So it's very simple for someone to say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to make a stripped down version of Jira. And right now it's even easier because these apps already exist. You could just tell your LLM, hey, duplicate Jira. Here's the screenshots, but I want it to look like this. Here's all the additional functionality I want. Don't add in all this stuff. Make me the app. And it will generate that app so fast. I mean, within hours, you'll have a fully replicated app of exactly what you want, doing everything you want to do, and it's going to work amazing. And then I don't need the Jira subscription anymore. Confluence, there's a wiki. Well, I can just make a wiki via an app. Very easy. So now it'll all be internal, and I own it all. I own all my data. No more data leaks, no more data breaches. I don't have to worry about authenticating to 1,000 different things anymore. We're going to bring it all back in-house. So that's going to be pretty rad. So that's that shift. I think we're going to have a lot of these micro SaaS apps just taking over the internet just to absurd degree. We're going to see so many crazy things available that were just created because anyone can do it. You don't have to be a developer. It's almost like the YouTube of apps. Like in the beginning of the internet, right? If you want to put a video online, most of the time you put some time and effort into the video, and then you had to pay to put it up online and pay for the bandwidth to stream it, because video, and not even streaming, just downloading the video was very expensive back then. Now it's just dime a dozen. And what happens? Everyone has a YouTube channel. Everyone has videos. There's so much video being posted online. It's crazy. And photos. It's so much because everyone can do it because it's so simple. That's what's going to happen to applications. Right now, you're only seeing apps where it's like, oh, this person's really smart, so they can make an app, and they're really good at marketing, so they were able to market it and get it sold. Now, anybody can make the app. And then the apps are going to go viral through social media marketing or whatever the new thing is that's going to come out. And that's going to be the marketing. So marketing is going to be huge, but there's going to be marketing AI agents and out there. So it's all going to tie back. And then, so as these huge apps just basically blow up and don't become completely useless, they're going to disintegrate and disappear. Then you're going to have billions of just, this is the app I want. It's almost like the apps, like I was saying before, it's like going to be the app store of apps, but for SaaS apps. And they're going to be tied to the agents. So you can just say, I want this one, I want this one, I want this one. There'll be like plugins for your IDE because there's just going to be so many of them. It's going to be crazy. Because every time someone has an idea, you know what would be cool? They just make it. And then all of a sudden it's available. So I think we're going to see a lot of that soon. And so I don't think it's going to be a total death of the SaaS world. I think it's going to be a changing of the guard. I think we're going to have a very different SaaS world out there. And what comes after this consolidation, that's going to be anybody's guess. Because at that point in time, we really need to see where AI is. And I don't know. Things are moving so fast. Like, I don't think anyone can really know where the future is going to go, because new things are going to happen that we do not expect right now that are just going to be transformative in how we can do business and how we can work, to where it's going to make things just change drastically. So if you don't know how to do prompt engineering, there's another reason why you should really get on that. That's it. Later. Nidus has just created the first iOS app made exclusively for identity management professionals. It's called Nidus Breachcast, and you can download it now. It's amazing. We have real-time updates of all the latest breaches that are occurring, CVEs as they come out real-time, really pertaining just to identity management. We have media that's going on this podcast. We're going to be bringing in a lot more others as well. And we even have a complete vendor list of all the identity management vendors and all their products, so you can find out exactly where to download their software, all the documentation. And what's even more awesome is an identity management glossary. All those crazy words and acronyms that we can never remember, they're all listed in there for you. No ads, just pure information to make your life simple.